All right, so we'll get started. This is it Nate Hoogeveen? Is that how you say your last name?
Yeah.
Okay, nice. He is the director of river programs for the Iowa DNR. As team leader, he oversees diverse efforts: river science, survey, construction, grant administration, data and mapping services, and program planning. He's also a certified canoe association instructor, and he wrote a book called Paddling Iowa. So I'll let you have at it.
Okay, is this working? Everybody hearing me back there? Great. So, this is kind of a really interesting, energetic time because we're just wrapping this this whole river restoration toolbox thing up. It's due to be completed at the end of April, and so I think we'll have it up online about midday. And that's starting at the end. So flashing back to the beginning, throughout my career, I've been a student of rivers, and part of that especially when we were asked to take on the Lowhead Dam mitigation project, sometimes if you're going to do something with a dam, that's a major channel change, and you got to figure out how to stabilize along with that. So Glenn Harmon on my team and I started doing a number of river restoration trainings, both with Minnesota DNR, and then we started doing natural channel design trainings, and actually went through 4 levels of that. And I started as a guy that just kind of wrote a book, and now I'm a guy that does math and talks to engineers a lot, and then as those trainings developed, you start getting asked to do more and look at more, so there really was only so many of us in the state that could look at a river project and tell anybody if it's any good or not. There was a lot of demand for doing this, like with the Ward Board, for example. Jerry Nepple had asked me to join that, along with Tom Eisenhardt and Kathy Woida with NRCS, and John Thomas from the Hungry Canyons Alliance. And we'd get these projects in, and it's like you just didn't have enough to go on to say whether it was good or bad, or and then SRF kind of came into its own as far as funding watershed projects, a lot of which seemed to center around creek instabilities and what is a good project? I mean, like, what should you be designing? What's is it? There's a lot of focus on stream banks and stream bank erosion, but when you look underneath it, a lot of times it's not just the banks, it's a lot of other stuff too. There's some fundamental things, like maybe some bed degradation, or maybe there's a lot of channel widening, enlargement going on because the watershed's changing underneath you, and there just needed to be a more clear way of looking at that. And so at the same time that Iowa DNR was working on, and I should actually track with my slides a little bit here, but we were doing this business process improvement. I don't want to get too much into that, other than to say that our leadership asked us, they said, okay, there's all kinds of stuff in the DNR going on centering around rivers. It's just that we don't all talk to each other enough. So they kind of locked us in a room for a week, and so anybody from like floodplains and fisheries to my group and lots of other folks got together. We had some outside folks involved too, what we all realize is that we're all talking past each other. We're talking about kind of the same things sometimes, but we don't quite understand each other's issues. Like, floodplains very much talks about recurrence, but they're only interested in the higher end of the flow range. And, like my group is like looking at the, base flow and, kind of bank pull channel and all this. And is there a way to, make this language more common so that we can communicate better, so that we can communicate among engineers and biologists better in particular, watershed coordinator to engineer, and so on. And then, having a more efficient way to deliver some of these products that would work something like the Iowa Stormwater Management Manual, except for streams. As you'll see, there's a lot more variables, though, in order to try to keep something naturally stable. This idea of just getting people to try more new techniques, to trust that some of these are standard practices in many places, and that with some thought, we could develop Iowa ways of applying them to keep them in conservative ranges. And what does conservative even mean when you're working in a stream? And then finally, I think all of our final outcome goal would be that there's more river stability, which surprisingly equates with better habitat in almost all cases, because there used to be this thing some smart aleck put up on our refrigerator at our break room at DNR, and it said, "Fish need water, feds say." It was a newspaper clipping, and well, as it turns out, as these channels are getting blown out and wide because of excessive energy and such, well, just having the depth for fish in a lot of cases in a narrower, tighter channel can be a major improvement in habitat. So what did we do? We started this thing called this River Restoration Toolbox effort, and it was and still is a collaboration. DNR has like the environmental services side, and I'm more in the conservation recreation side. Co-managed this project with Tim Hall. He was actually the leader for it on the environmental services side, but I was the lead technical advisor for this project. We brought in a lot of folks to help us on an advisory committee to review all the practices, the methodology of the assessment method. We just really thought that in the stream restoration world, there's like some raging debates about, my method's better than your method, blah, blah, blah. In Iowa, we decided real quick, we don't have room for that. We don't have time for it. And let's talk about practices that'll work here, and let's talk about the baseline assessment that's really needed here. Go out and try it and adapt it when it doesn't work. If we have problems with it, we're going to change it in the next year or two. So we developed some consensus on what practices we thought should go into it, and then quickly realized, oh man, we can't do this ourselves. There's not enough time, and we needed more expertise, and frankly, we needed more gravitas, to have somebody else come in and say that these methods. You might want to throw some out. You might want to add these other methods, and so we put out an RFP that ultimately hired Stantec to lead this project for us and to design a river restoration toolbox, including both anything from the data that you should really be collecting through design recommendations. And then detailed practices, and I'll show you what all that looks like. George Athanasakis was the lead for this project, and he's got dozens of large-scale river restoration projects under his belt. He's been he leads the restoration group out of the Louisville office for Stantec, and it has been really great to work with. So our advisors included anything from academia to various staff from different entities around the state, and we wanted to make sure it had some real world eyes on it, and then also some theoretical eyes on it, and just making sure that we're broad based enough. And then we brought in guinea pigs, paying guinea pigs last fall. In collaboration with ISWEP and Iowa Rivers Revival, we tested a first version of this toolbox on a group on the assessment side of it that came into Des Moines, surveyed in a creek. Within, a day, we're entering the data, and then by the next morning, had some answers, and that really helped us get some real-world ideas about both how to do the training and what some of the deficiencies were that needed to be addressed. So, this whole thing is really looking at what natural rivers would do left to their own devices, and how can you kind of either tweak your river into getting closer to that scenario, or whole scale start over again because it's that far gone. And how do you make the decision about whether it is that far gone or not? Is it because you want to make more money? Or is it because there's an assessment method that told you that, well, you're way out of range here. We'd rather have it be the latter. We want to reduce the confusion and review process. Like State Revolving Fund will start incorporating this into contracts, and everybody's aware up front that it's more work up front, but we're thinking the results on the back end of it are going to be so much better that that's going to be very worthwhile. We want to improve project success, and lastly, really reduce unintended damage to aquatic riparian habitats. So there's questions in there that are about, okay, what have you got? Do you have some important habitats already that are worth not messing up through doing a project because we decided that it needed to be done for some other reason? Maybe something's going to fall in, and should you be more careful? The recommendations are holistic, but they don't really tie somebody into one practice or another. They're more like ranked and recommended, so that there's still design going on underneath this thing that needs to be smart. So we want projects not to look like these. Hey, it's really stable, right? It's stable. But what's it doing? It's you've taken away all the functions, right? And the more functions you take away from a stream system, the less it's got in terms of biology, in terms of nutrient fixing, and it's just trucking stuff through. That's also heating water up, obviously, and creating a lot of externalities to solve one problem. And this is a lanes relationship, and it's very well known and very accepted among, however you look at stream restoration, that rivers and streams have this job. They move water, that's obvious, but they also move sediment, and that interplay of sediment on a given slope, based on your sediment sizes and stuff. That interplay is what results in what your channel looks like and what your floodplain looks like. It's just that in a lot of cases when we tweak one without tweaking the others, we cause these instabilities that start making things unravel. But how do you get back there once once you're off balance, once your scale is tilted one way or another, if your bed is degrading, should you build it back up, or should you say, let's make this new bed elevation into our regular elevation and then make a bunch of floodplains? So adding to the engineering is this concept of fluvial geomorphology. You've probably heard of it, I hope, maybe, but because I've spent a lot of my life in it lately. It's basically looking at the influence of rivers and streams and their formation on the surface of the earth, and why do they form in the ways that they do, given the soil types, the rainfalls, the land use, all those factors result in this expression, this thing that's called a stream. And then in terms of important stream functions, you've got you either have or should have eventually, a defined bankful channel in order to have a a stable stream system, and it should have some level of floodplain. Sometimes it doesn't actually need as much floodplain as we might think in order for it to be stable. There are certain channel types that can accommodate less floodplain and have some major implications for what can still be a healthy stream in, say, an urban setting. We look a lot at these low elevation floodplains because that has a lot of implications on stability. And looking at bankful discharge as a normalizing function. Why? Because it controls what the channel form can possibly be. It controls, in other words, like what should your cross-sectional area be, how deep should it be, and how wide should it be, right? It helps you to understand the hydrology underlying it in terms of, are you in a more wetland system and you have a slightly higher recurrence interval, but it's always below 2 years is where you would expect to see it, or are you in a really effective, drained system like a drainage ditch or some urban settings. You might be closer down to like 1.2 or even 1.1 in a drainage ditch. Why? Because that's its job. It's supposed to get water out. And then, this is a project that I designed in Des Moines, and, like, you can tell right away if you got that bank full channel sized right. So this is, right after construction, and then this was a flood that happened like that same day, because you always get floods the same day after you build something. But there it is, and it's kicking deposition up right at that elevation where this tiny little floodplain is. So I want you to understand that there is a right way to do this that can result in answers that are stable. And then and in a system like this, we look more for, this has grown in a little bit. We look more for like that vertical sinuosity. It's a step pool, so you maintain your depth by scour in these small drops, and you space your drops according to your channel width, and there's ways to look at it that really help a designer come up with answers that function like nature would, even though you just built it. So then, a lot of these channels, as I mentioned, are evolving because of some change, some kind of insult to the system, or maybe many of them. And this is Iowa where we work, right? So this is just one model. There's a lot of other ones, but basically is that? Yeah, that's showing up. Okay. So like you have this pre-modification, and then you have a change. This says channelized, but it doesn't have to be channelized. It can be a watershed change, whatever. And then a common response is for the bed to start degrading, although it can also start going straight into widening, or off the hook lateral migration and all that. But the point is that you have this change going on, and then eventually it's going to widen, and then start degrading and catching some material, some depositional material, and building a new floodplain until it tightens the channel back up, and then eventually you achieve this what they call quasi-equilibrium stage in stage 6. So the ones circled in red are are the ones where we're probably, somebody's coming to us saying, we got a problem, like our banks are falling in, or whatever. But why? What are the key drivers of that? Well, this starts to help you explain, that maybe it's bed degradation, and oh boy, if you go, just stabilizing stream banks on a gully, you're not going to have a long-term successful project, I can promise you, because it needs to go through all the rest of this change. And it's just going to. It's going to keep trying to do that. This is another really important, underlying factor of the toolbox, is that there's natural streams And based on, shear stress, if you have a stream that has a tightly defined channel, and so as discharge is coming up, notice here on this curve that your shear stress is ratcheting up really fast. But then you get to this point where it hits the floodplain, and you see this intersection here. All of a sudden your shear stress goes way down. Why? Because it's in a floodplain that's usually vegetated. It's usually accessed somewhat infrequently, so the vegetation can actually survive. Plus it's all shallow water out there instead of deep water, which has a lot more effect on the materials in the bed. So having a bed and a floodplain is really important, and having a bed that's not oversized. So this is a nice wide channel, but in this case, which is more like this line, which would be an entrenched, maybe a channelized stream, something, all that shear stress has to be contained inside walls, inside a channel. And so it just keeps going up logarithmically as opposed to your shear stress, as opposed to how a floodplain system works. That's why a stream can stay in balance better if you give it just a little bit of room. And we're not talking necessarily crazy amounts, but so looking at stability and equilibrium can yield better habitat, better nutrient processing. If we're talking about wetlands that a tile drain drops off into, what are we actually talking about? The only way for that to function long-term stable is a floodplain. It's a low floodplain where some of the nutrient processing could happen. There's just this whole idea of infrastructure that doesn't fall in anymore. That's a good idea, and it looks better. It looks like a stream, like something people want to use and interact with. So as far as the practices go, there's a defined set of practices within the toolbox in major headings, and then there's what are called techniques underneath each one of those major headings. So there's grade control, there's vegetative restoration. I'm not going to just read you the list because we'll go through these. But these are the grade control, recommended grade control structure practices that are available within here. And so, for example, this is a cross vein. And I've seen a lot of things that people call a cross vein, but we also looked for ways to Iowize these and figure out which situations where they should be used and not. They can be great structures for fish habitat, but if you try to put them in an entrenched stream, they will fail. You need to know that up front. And they're very dimensioned out, and so each one of these, dimensions, angles, whatever, is shown in various views. You have your profile view of it here. Here's your cross section, and then it's tabled out as to what ranges you should be working within for each of these structures. To our knowledge, nobody's ever really done this before in the stream restoration world. Like really looking in a detailed way at various practitioners' techniques that they've come up with, bunching them together, and then saying, don't use this with caution within this range, and so on. So this is what it looks like in the field, and you can see it's a very low structure that provides a limited amount of grade control, but you're not going to do huge drops with these things, right? But you can definitely fix a grade in place and have some reassurance, like below a bridge on a smaller stream. This can be a great technique, and has converging flows that maintain scour in the center. We always like to put scour in the center instead of on the banks, and that's something that can be pretty helpful. This is a rock arch rapids. We've built a lot of these below dams, but we've built them freestanding in various places more for grade control purposes. It's a structure with a lot of backbone to it. And then there's chapters on vegetative restoration, riparian buffering, and just kind of how to successfully do that. Bank and floodplain restoration are big ones. And so when I was talking about saturated buffers before, for example, well, we had an eroding stream bank here. This is on the Boone River. We used longitudinal peak stone toe protection with some bendway weirs, but created a ton of floodplain, low floodplain out there that we then put willows down in, and that's catching sediment, and it's taking the pressure off this bank. We actually excavated this one back, and over wide rivers, you might actually be pushing them out into the channel to get a better sediment transport. Oh, my subscription expired. Huh, okay. But you know, if you were to do this where there's a field tile outlet, wouldn't that be a great place to create a little rock basin and, you know, have your water outlet onto it? There's a geomorphic channel design chapter, and this one's a lot more data intensive. It requires really a lot more assessment up front, a lot of field work. And it's basically where you're whole scale redesigning a whole channel. And you want to have enough metrics to make sure that you don't mess it up, and that it unravels on you and creates a mess. This is one that we're hopeful that we're not doing that on. We've done phase 1 on this on the Maquoketa River at Quaker Mill, and in this case, the dam used to be up there where that channel that we built is going to. The river jumped over a dike here, and it's been running there since 2010. We took out the dam. I've been working with the county engineer because the river's really going through kind of the wrong bridge. It's like too small of a bridge for it to. So there's like there's a $500,000 bridge that's going under, and then there's the $1 million+ bridge on, you know, the other side. So we need to put the river back over there. So we ran it through this former lake bed and created the sinuosity that the stream needs. We didn't exceed radius and curvature based on, you know, things we could observe other places on the same stream. That's what this geomorphic channel design process is about, is like being able to make a new stream where there's a need for it and where that makes the most sense. So as opposed to building another bridge, it made more sense to spend $500,000 on this project from the county engineer's standpoint, if that makes sense. So, and then there's a lot of aquatic habitat and cover features, and this is more from a fisheries standpoint, that some of these could be incorporated, and it really just details out how to do them successfully. Stream bank toe protection is one that we know will be used a lot. How are we doing on time? What's that?
Oh, we're right there.
We are right there?
Yeah.
Okay, I've got to skip over this stuff, but I do want to show you the assessment quick. Time management. So basically you go collect a lot of data. Then, and it's a lot, it's a day's worth of data collection probably on a lot of streams of the size we're working on. Looks at these key drivers of instability, and then gives you answers. You know, like, is your bank height ratio off? Well, in that one, a 2.0 is way too high. You know, like, you'd really not want to be that high, and so on. It goes down through all these factors and tells you things that need to be addressed. And then you can address them in your design conditions by actually changing cross sections and stuff. And then this is a quick example from the workshop we did last fall. This is a semi-messed up stream, not as messed up as that other one, because we see a lot of yellows, right? So in here, we're in a range where we definitely could say just applying practices that address the yellows is safe. We're in kind of a safe zone to do that, and there's a logic system underneath that, but it gives all these answers for rankings of different practices that you may or may not want to use. And so, and the great thing about it is that you can hover over it and it tells you why. It doesn't just like, you know, make you trust it. And so, you know, and there's going to be cases where we find situations where we're all going to want to argue with it, right? I mean, I've already seen it. but it's these are the things you should be discussing in a stream restoration project. So, and there I will stop, and I appreciate your time and attention.
We have time for a couple questions.
So when will it be available?
Mid-May. Stantec's on the hook to complete this by April 30. So.
Okay. So an online resource?
Yep. It's a spreadsheet-based tool, basically. Yeah.
What level of training would you need to use it?
We're looking at 4-day training for the getting started kind of stuff, and then an additional 4-day for the geomorphic channel design part of it.
Yeah.